Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special video. In this video we'll be looking at ventilation and gas exchange for the Edexcel GCSE Biology and Double Biology specifications. So always keep your eyes open for the specification links to the syllabus so that you know where you are on your course. So we'll start today with the idea of breathing. Now, if we start with this very important chemical reaction that we mentioned in the last video, respiration, you should by now know that it needs oxygen. And oxygen will enter the blood through the lungs and the breathing system. This breathing system is sometimes referred to as the respiratory system. Please do not confuse the respiratory system with respiration. Respiration is a chemical reaction that happens in all living cells where glucose and oxygen are joined together to produce carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released. The breathing system of the respiratory system is shown in the diagram below. This entire system is held in the upper half of your body, which is known as the thorax. And the lungs are surrounded by a very thin membrane called a pleural membrane, which will protect the lungs and reduce friction when the lungs inhale and exhale. So I'd like you to pause the video now and just see if you know the names of each part of the respiratory or breathing system. We have the names here. Try and put them in the correct place in the diagram. So here we have the answers. We're going to follow the passage of air as it moves through your breathing system. And we're talking about air because air is a mixture of gases, 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and about 1% other gases. So the air will enter the mouth or the nasal cavity, and then it will travel down the trachea. Here, the trachea is also known as the windpipe. The trachea will then split into two bronchus, one for each lungs. These bronchus will then split into many smaller and smaller tubes known as bronchioles. At the end of each bronchiole, there is a small structure called the alveoli, and the alveoli is where gas exchange takes place and the oxygen will move into the blood from the air. So we have two lungs on the diagram, but the first thing we need to consider is how does breathing take place. And breathing needs several of our structures that we see here. It's going to require the ribs, the intercostal muscles, and this muscle down at the bottom, which is known as the diaphragm. An interesting fact about the diaphragm is that when it is relaxed, it is a dome shape, and when it is contracted or flattened, it moves down like that. So we have a flat shape when it's contracted, which increases the volume of the thorax. So now we're going to move on and look at ventilation. And ventilation is in effect breathing or inhaling followed by exhaling. So pause the video for a moment before I go through this gap fill and just see whether or not you can explain and summarize breathing on your own. So here are the answers. Breathing in and out is known as ventilation. Breathing in is called inhaling, and that's when air goes into the lungs, and a gas from the air called oxygen diffuses into the blood. A waste gas dissolved in the blood plasma called carbon dioxide will diffuse in the opposite direction from the blood into the lungs. Breathing out is known as exhaling. When we do this, the waste gas carbon dioxide will go into the air. Oxygen gas from the air is needed by the cells in the body for respiration. The gas is carried by the blood, and the heart is an organ which will pump the blood, and blood travels around the body in tubes called blood vessels. So how exactly do you inhale and exhale? Well, hopefully in your normal lessons the teacher will have shown you a diagram or a model very similar to this. It's known as the bell jar lungs. And it's a very important model because you will often get asked questions on this in the exams. In fact, diagrams very similar to this may well appear in the exams as well. So what happens? Well, in this bell jar model, we have a fixed glass jar, and at the bottom is a flexible piece of rubber which acts just like the diaphragm. And inside we have two balloons, left and right, which will inflate and fill with oxygen, fill with air. How? Well, your teacher will pull down on this piece of rubber here, and when you pull down, that will increase the volume of the bell jar. And if we increase the volume of any particular gas, as you should know from physics, that will decrease the pressure inside. And if we decrease the pressure, then air will be forced in. And if we do the opposite and we push the diaphragm upwards, we will decrease the volume, and that will increase the pressure, and air will then be forced outwards. And this same process happens in your body when you are breathing. One of the downsides of the bell jar model is that the glass can't move, obviously, but in your body, if you feel your ribs here, your ribs can move, and they move because of a muscle called the intercostal rib muscle. If you've ever been out to a restaurant and you've eaten the ribs, you know that there's bone and then there's nice meat that you eat covered in sauce. That meat that you're eating on the rib bone is the intercostal rib muscles, or whichever animal that you're having, perhaps beef. So what happens when you inhale? Well, when you inhale, when you breathe in, the rib muscles will contract, those intercostal muscles contract, and your ribs move up and out. And the diaphragm below your ribs will flatten and move downwards, and the volume of the whole thorax will increase, and the pressure will decrease, and air will be pushed into the lungs from the outside. When you exhale, the opposite will happen. When you breathe out, the rib muscles, the intercostal rib muscles will relax, the ribs will move down and inwards, the diaphragm will move up and become dome-shaped, the volume of the thorax will increase, the volume of the thorax will decrease, and the pressure will increase, and air will be pushed out of the lungs. Now, this is a very, very common question, normally worth around 4 marks, so you need to have both paragraphs that I've got on this slide here memorized and fixed in your head. So I'd recommend that you pause the video now and try and fill them in. The answers will be on the next slide. So here are the answers. When you breathe in, the rib muscles contract, the ribs move up and outwards, and the diaphragm flattens and moves downwards. The volume of the thorax increases, the pressure decreases, and air is pushed into the lungs from the outside. Some people think that the lungs suck air in, they don't. They just create a very low pressure so that air gets pushed in, high pressure to low pressure. When you exhale and you breathe out, the rib muscles relax, the ribs move down and inwards, the diaphragm will become dome-shaped and move upwards, and the volume of the thorax will decrease. The pressure will increase, and this will push air out of the lungs. So this is how you ventilate your lungs, how you inhale and exhale. Remember, that's known as ventilation. So here's a few questions just to review what breathing and ventilation is. Pause the video now, try these questions, and I'll give you the answers in a moment. So the first question was to label a diagram of a respiratory system. I recommend that you print out a diagram and you fill it in, or you go back and look at the video for the answers so that you know where the mouth is, where the trachea and the bronchus is, where those small tubes in your body always end in eol, so bronchioles, where they are. You need to know that the bronchioles end in the alveoli, and you must know where the intercostal rib muscles and the diaphragm is. Describe the role of the pleural membrane. Well, that pleural membrane is there to reduce friction when the lungs are moving, and it's also there to prevent infection. It's a barrier to microorganisms. Summarize the process of breathing. So for this, we need to talk about air moving in and out. We need to discuss everything we've just mentioned with exhaling and inhaling. Define the term ventilation. Again, a very similar answer. We're looking at exhaling and inhaling. Describe the changes in the body that cause inhalation. Well, we need to mention that the intercostal muscles contract. The ribs move up and out. The diaphragm flattens. And the pressure, the volume increases, pressure decreases, and therefore air is forced in. Describe the changes that cause exhalation. Well, exhalation is all the changes we've just mentioned, but just in the opposite way. Intercostal muscles will relax, the ribs will move down and in, the diaphragm will become dome-shaped, volume will decrease, and pressure increase, and air is forced out. So the whole point of breathing or ventilation is to get fresh air containing oxygen into your alveoli, so that a process called gas exchange can take place. So what is gas exchange? Here we have a diagram of an alveoli, and just to show a few things firstly you need to notice the blood that's flowing in, and if you look here, this blood is flowing in through a capillary, and those capillaries are lined by cells. The wall of the capillary is lined by cells. That wall is just one cell thick. So if I show you that wall here and here, and you can see all the red blood cells in the capillary flowing along in and then away from the alveoli. Similarly, the wall of the alveoli, here I'm showing it you in orange, that wall of the alveoli is also just one cell thick. So we have a very, very short distance for diffusion to occur. Now, if we have a little think about the blood, it's travelled all around the body, it's lost most of its oxygen because it's travelled past the body cells which are respiring and removing that oxygen. So when the blood flows back to the lungs, that blood is deoxygenated blood. And that means it has a very low concentration of oxygen in the blood in the alveoli. However, there is a high concentration of carbon dioxide in that blood. Now, the air that we breathe has around about 0.03 or 0.04% carbon dioxide. It's a very low concentration of carbon dioxide. So therefore, carbon dioxide will diffuse from the blood into the air, just because we have a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood and a low concentration in the air. Simple diffusion, it's passive, it doesn't need any extra energy. It's enough to remove all the carbon dioxide from your blood that you can then excrete by exhaling and breathing out the carbon dioxide. But in the opposite way, when you breathe in, you're breathing in a mixture of gases, one of which is oxygen, and we have 21% of oxygen in the air that we breathe, and that's a very high concentration of oxygen. Very, very high concentration of oxygen. So, as we've already said, in the blood there's a low concentration of oxygen, there's a high concentration of oxygen in the alveoli. So the oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli and into the blood, and in particular it will diffuse into a molecule called hemoglobin, which is found in the red blood cells. And the hemoglobin will bind to the oxygen and form a chemical called oxyhemoglobin, and the red blood cells will carry the oxygen around the body, ready for any other cells that need it for respiration. So gas exchange happens just because of simple diffusion. So just pause the video now and see whether or not you can answer the questions that are in front of us. Copy down the gap fill in the gaps. So here are the answer. Gas exchange takes place in the alveoli. Deoxygenated blood in the capillaries comes close to the alveoli. The oxygen is in a high concentration in the alveoli and a low concentration in the blood, so oxygen moves from the alveoli into the blood by diffusion. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, is in a high concentration in the blood and a low concentration in the air in the alveoli, so carbon dioxide moves by diffusion from the blood into the air in the alveoli. And as the blood flows away from the alveoli, that blood is now oxygenated. Blood rich in oxygen. Because we're looking at a part of your body, a structure of your body that relies on diffusion, it has several adaptations to make certain that diffusion is very, very fast. And again, this is a common exam question, so you need to learn each of the sentences here. How are the alveoli adapted to their function of gas exchange by diffusion? So first and foremost, the alveoli have a large surface area for gas exchange to take place. The alveoli walls and the capillary walls are very, very thin, so there is a short diffusion distance, or short distance for diffusion, so diffusion will take place very quickly. And finally, the alveoli have a very good blood supply, and this helps to maintain the diffusion gradient. Every time some oxygen moves in, it is removed and replaced by deoxygenated blood, so you will always have a low concentration of oxygen in the blood and a high concentration in the alveoli. That's called a diffusion gradient or a concentration gradient. So you'll always have that concentration gradient because there's a good blood supply, so there will always be diffusion. We will never reach equilibrium. So, a couple of review questions. Pause the video now, see whether you can answer these questions. I'll give you the answers in a moment. So, describe how the process of gas exchange occurs. Well, as we've just seen in that gap fill, we should be talking about the different concentrations of both the carbon dioxide and the oxygen, and we want to know where they are in high concentration and low concentration and which way the gases will move. The oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli and move into the blood, and the carbon dioxide will diffuse from the blood and move into the alveoli. How is the alveoli adapted to its function? Well, don't forget we need to talk about having thin walls, both the capillary and the alveoli. Therefore, we can have a short diffusion distance. We need to mention that we have a large surface area and a good blood supply to maintain the diffusion gradient. So what about the last effects then? Thinking about smoking. Clearly smoking has a very big effect on the lungs. So what do we need to discuss in terms of smoking? Well, you may well have seen diagrams like this, quite graphic diagrams, where we have a smoker's lung which is very dark, full of tar, where the lung is not particularly flexible, and you may even have seen videos on YouTube where people have tried to inflate these lungs, and you can see that a smoker's lung holds a much smaller volume of air compared to a non-smoker's lung, which is pinker, brighter, more flexible, and can hold a larger volume of air. So which chemicals cause these changes? Well, it's the chemicals that are found in tobacco, and it doesn't matter how you choose to inhale your tobacco, whether you use a traditional cigarette or perhaps a pipe or even a shisha, you are still inhaling the same tobacco from the tobacco plant with the same chemicals that are produced by the tobacco plant as a defense mechanism when it's a plant. But some of those give us pleasurable effects, and some of these chemicals are very harmful to our body as well. So here's just a small sample of the thousands of different harmful chemicals that you can find in tobacco, in cigarette smoke. Candle wax, butane, acetic acid, methane, methanol, and several that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be looking at nicotine, we're going to be looking at carbon monoxide, and one that's actually not mentioned on here, tar. So firstly, nicotine. Nicotine is a highly addictive substance. It's that addiction that gives you the pleasure of smoking. But it also raises blood pressure, narrows the arteries, and can cause high blood pressure that can lead to blood clots and heart disease. So nicotine is by no way a harmless chemical. We also have carbon monoxide in cigarette smoke, and carbon monoxide is a poisonous gas which will bind to the hemoglobin in red blood cells irreversibly. Once that carbon monoxide has joined with the hemoglobin, it will never let go. That's why if you find yourself in an environment with maybe a faulty heater where you're producing a large amount of carbon monoxide, it will kill you in a relatively short period of time because your hemoglobin will become completely saturated with carbon monoxide and you won't be able to carry any oxygen around your body. That means no respiration in your cells, no energy produced, and eventually you will die. So when the carbon monoxide joins with hemoglobin, it forms a chemical called carboxyhemoglobin, and this makes them incapable of transporting the oxygen around your body. The final chemical that we need to mention is tar. Now, tar will destroy the cilia which line the trachea. You may lower down the school have seen little diagrams which look a little bit like this, where you will see epithelial cells which are ciliated, and we have lots of cilia, and then a goblet cell which I'm filling in now, and goblet cells make mucus. The goblet cells are very useful because they make the mucus, and mucus traps dirt and bacteria, but it also provides a very good environment for bacteria to reproduce in, so you obviously need to clear the mucus out of your lungs. And it's the job of the little cilia on the ciliated epithelial cells to remove that mucus, and they will just waft and move that mucus up and out of your lungs to the back of your throat. You'll swallow it, it'll go down into your stomach acid, and that stomach acid will digest the mucus and kill any bacteria that happen to be in there. But tar destroys these cilia and therefore makes it far more difficult for you to remove dirt and bacteria from your lungs. The mucus also tends to accumulate in your lungs, which can cause a smoker's cough or chronic bronchitis, because that's the only way that you can easily shift the mucus is by having quite a violent cough. Tar is also one of over 60 different carcinogen chemicals that are found in cigarettes. Now, any carcinogen is a chemical that causes cancer. So it's the tar and other carcinogens that are responsible for lung cancer in smokers, and even in non-smokers who have inhaled secondhand smoke. Tar also damages the walls of the alveoli, which reduces their surface area. So if there's less walls of the alveoli, that means there's less diffusion, less oxygen reaching into the red blood cells, which means there's less respiration happening in the body cells, and that means your body cells have got less energy. And this can cause a disease called emphysema. Now, if you happen to have emphysema, you will lead a drastically different lifestyle to the lifestyle that you might have had when you were younger. Simple tasks like walking from your living room to the front door to welcoming a visitor, or unloading the washing machine, will become incredibly difficult because you simply don't have enough oxygen in your bloodstream to provide the oxygen you need for respiration and the energy to do those tasks. So how is emphysema caused? Well, we've mentioned a little bit about this, so pause the video now, see if you can fill in the gap fill, have a look at these two diagrams that may well help you, and I'll give you the answers in a moment. So emphysema, smoking damages and destroys the walls of the alveoli, and this decreases the surface area of the alveoli, so there's less gas exchange taking place. Less oxygen diffuses into the hemoglobin in the blood, there's less oxygen available for respiration, so there's less energy release in respiration, so you feel tired all the time. This disease is called emphysema. If we just have a quick look at the two diagrams that we've got over here, you can see the difference. On this first diagram, we have lots and lots of walls of the alveoli. Each wall, each orange line that you see here, is a place where gas exchange can happen. The more orange lines we've got, the more gas exchange can happen and the more oxygen can reach into your body. But when you smoke, the tar damages and breaks down these walls. So because these walls are being destroyed, you end up with a much larger alveoli, but with much less surface area, as you have below here. So larger alveoli, but there's less walls, there's less surface area, there's less gas exchange, which means less oxygen making it into the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, less respiration, less energy, and you will feel more and more tired. So, a little review question here. Pause and I'll give you the answer in a moment. So explain how the various chemicals in cigarette smoke damage the body. Well, you need to be naming at least 3 chemicals there. You need to be naming nicotine. You need to be discussing that it's addictive, leading to high blood pressure, and therefore blood clots and heart disease. In high enough doses, it can actually cause heart attack. You need to also mention carbon monoxide, and you need to link that into the fact it binds to hemoglobin irreversibly, so it can't carry oxygen. And then finally, you need to link in tar, and you need to be mentioning that tar is a carcinogen, and that can cause lung cancer. Tar can damage the alveoli, and link that into causing emphysema. And you also need to mention that tar can damage the cilia and cause coughing because the mucus cannot be removed. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that it's been useful in your learning. Make certain that you've written some notes from what you've learned. Be active in your learning, and then try and go and find somebody else to talk about, so that you can explain and teach to them, and hopefully therefore retain more of this knowledge. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see the next videos as and when they come out. Thank you very much. This has been a Mr. Carter Science Special.